In this country, of the new president's inaugural address, it was painted as a very finely crafted speech, very long, on touching all the right touchstones, for want of a better word, of healing, of pulling people back together. Yet the early actions as a former politician undertaken by the new president did not match the rhetoric. It didn't seem that there was a willingness to say, why did so many Americans vote the way they did? Why are so many Americans feeling alienated? Isn't there a real probability that many Americans now feel, well, we were described as deplorables, and it's evident we are now really regarded as deplorables, rather than we've actually been heard and our concerns are now going to be taken into account?
I think, John, if I may, you're even being charitable in your sober and judicious description. It's even worse than that Joe Biden has he doesn't control the Senate legislative, in the sense it's 50-50, and only by the intervention of Kamala Harris as vice president will he get anything through. And more importantly, he was supposed to widen his lead in the House, and he's down to about 6 seats. So he's got the smallest margin in the House. And people thought because of those realities, he would reach out to the middle. But as I said earlier, he seems to think that it's a very dangerous thing to take on the media, social media, Silicon Valley, professional sports, entertainment, Hollywood. That cultural nexus is frightening, and the cancel culture as well. So what he's doing is he's decided that he's going to open the border. He's going to go after fossil fuels, stop pipeline construction, use subsidized wind and solar, even though the United States is now the largest producer and exporter in the world of gas and oil. He's going to dial that back. And he's going to do this without going through the legislature, the Congress. He's going to do it by executive fiat. He's already had an array of cultural issues, from transgenderism. He's backed off from the Trump idea that you're biologically one gender or another. It's important because female sports in the United States are increasingly dominated by biological males that have so-called transgressed to the opposite sex. I could go. He's resetting the Iranian-Israeli-Arab dynamic. I think he's going to reset the China dynamic. So he feels that he doesn't have the legislative support or even the American support, public support, but he has the office of the presidency, and he has the left and its levers of influence behind him, and he's got 4 years to act. So he's a man in a hurry, and I think we're going to see some radical thing. The key thing to watch for is there's 2 or 3 senators that live in state constituencies that are not entirely Democratic, and especially Joe Manchin in West Virginia and Senator Sima in Arizona. And if they follow that agenda, they're in danger of never being elected again. So, and they can't lose one senator. And so that's one thing to watch. The other is, will they really end the Senate filibuster and allow Senate business, the deliberative body, to enact legislation 5150 with the vice president's intervention? If they do that, their supporters have promised to admit Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as a state, and give 4 immediate left-wing senators to the cause. They want to pack the court from 9 to 15 justices to nullify the Trump conservative advantage. And I think they'll probably move to get rid of the Electoral College and go just to a 51% plebiscite, which would favor the large cities. So they have a very ambitious agenda, and it's hanging in the thread right now by about 1 or 2 senators whether it will be enacted or not.
I can't help wondering. I noticed George Shultz, who died recently, sadly, just before he wrote an article that appeared in Australia warning that that the printing of money, effectively, very low interest rates, the assumption that somehow the American greenback would always be the dominant currency. These were a very foolish set of assumptions. One of the things that strikes me is that with this left-wing agenda that's now so prominent, I mean, America's economic recovery had a lot to do with cheap energy and what have you. All of that's being put at risk. The blowout in the debt, the enormous amount of debt-fueled liquidity in the community must be dangerous economically. And one wonders how quickly it will become apparent that socialism is a disaster economically. It's just so strange to me as an Australian seeing America walk away from what has made it so prosperous, and which will in fact create more of the very problems they say they're trying to solve. Disparity, for example, between opportunities that older people have had and that younger people have. Economic reality must bite soon.
Yeah, I think what we've got ourselves into, we owe $30 trillion in aggregate national debt, and we're running $2 trillion deficits. And why this has not imploded is that we have de facto, as much of the world, but zero interest rates. In other words, the 1 or 2% Fed rate does not cover the rise in inflation, which is still low. So basically, we're borrowing all of this free money, and we're paying for it by not paying interest to people who have passbooks. So it's one way of looking at what we're doing in America is a multi-trillion-dollar transfer of wealth from the parsimonious middle-class passbook holder who's not familiar with Wall Street or real estate market, puts, say, $100,000 in their life savings and was accustomed to getting 5% return, maybe $500 or $600 a month for the retirement. That they're getting nothing. In fact, they're losing the value, and that money is going into, it's kind of a stimulus program to cheap interest for mortgages, cars, but also for the national, as a result of the national debt. I don't think that's sustainable, because at some point, if we do get inflation, we're going to have to raise interest rates. If we raise interest rates, the debt cost will crowd out so much in the budget. That's one great worry that we're all having here. The other is, of course, when we try to dissect how we had the lowest peacetime unemployment since the late 40s, and we look at lowest minority unemployment in history just a year ago, to tell you the truth, it was in January of 2020, we can see that Trump's deregulation and energy development and trying to have tax incentives to bring back capital to the United States were kind of a trifecta that created a huge economic boom of untapped labor and capital that was on the sidelines during the Obama administration, felt, this is a friendly government and I want to get in while I can. And enormous amounts of capital were used in a muscular fashion. That's stopped right now. The only thing that we in America are confused about is that when you print that much money, and we have $2 trillion that's just been allocated in debt, and another trillion that was budgeted but has not yet been spent, and you let out 330 million people from lockdown with their appetites of pent-up demand. They haven't gone to the restaurant, they haven't gone on a vacation, they haven't bought a washer, a car, and they've got a lot of money. I think you're going to see an artificial boom for 12 or 15 months, followed by a sharp correction. And whether that and how that affects the midterm election is everybody's guess now.
Yeah. You, of course, are an eminent historian. It strikes me that we are determined not to understand history, not to allow it to interfere with what we want to do, even when all of its lessons scream at us that in the end, high levels of indebtedness cost you your freedom.
Yeah, I mean, the great classicist Michael Grant, an Englishman that I had as a professor, but he was also a great popularizer. But what people fail to remember about Grant was that he started out his career as a very narrow, scholastic, academic numismatics. He was an expert on ancient coinage, and he wrote his books based on an examination of extant coinage from Greece and Rome, and showed that when the gold and silver content dissipated and they were veneered with copper, for example, then that was a indication that the society, 5th century Athens, 4th century Athens, or Rome in the 2nd century, 3rd century AD, whatever the period under discussion was, that the society was in crisis, because the first symptom is that they print money, or in that case, they coin coinage with metals that could not back up the value of the coinage. And they did so for usually what the poet Juvenal said, bread and circuses. Massive entitlements of free food for urban populations, and then free entertainment to make sure that people were not restless. And I think that's pretty much the story of societies. Societies don't are not murdered usually. Very rarely are they invaded and destroyed. They usually commit suicide. And if you want to know one of the reasons why they do, it seems to be that they are physically irresponsible. And once you start doing it, it's very hard. I can't think of a leader, the skills that would be necessary to tell the American people, we're going to have not just a balanced budget, but a surplus budget. You're going to have no cost of living increases in your Social Security, or you're going to have much more verification for workers' compensation or something. I don't think that in our political climate today, it would be allowable. You'd be called a racist, you'd be called cruel and heartless, the media, the social media, it would be even almost impossible. And that was one of the attractions of Trump, that people said, he's not just a renegade, he doesn't care. He can say anything to anybody, anytime, anywhere. And we need that sort of chemotherapy to deal with this existential metastasized cancer.